Hi everyone and welcome back to Macaroon. In this video, I'll show you how to make this magical, color-changing unicorn plushie. This is actually not that difficult, especially if you already have some experience making sock plushies. If you're new here, then a big welcome, and don't forget to subscribe to both of my channels for more unique DIYs like this. Many people have requested more plushie and needle felting tutorials, so this one is going to have a combination of both. To get started, you'll need polyester stuffing or cotton wool, fluffy socks, felting wool, beads or buttons, extra strong hairspray, color-changing pigment, which I'll talk about in detail later on, and some sewing and felting needles. You will need 2 fluffy socks to make 1 unicorn, which is pretty amazing value. Most sock plushies require less than $5 worth of materials, which makes them perfect budget gifts or to sell for profit. I've got tons of other tutorials for these, so be sure to check out the playlist which I've linked below. Start by turning one sock inside out and then press it flat with the heel facing up like this. Then draw some outlines for the legs, just like I'm doing here. By the way, I'm going to be using black ink and thread throughout this video, so it shows up clearly on camera. However, you should always use a color that's similar to the shade of your sock. Make sure that one pair of legs is slightly closer to the heel than the other one in order to create a longer body for your unicorn. Now take some thread and backstitch along the outline. If this is your first time making sock plushies, then I highly recommend watching this video here. While you're sewing, be sure to turn the sock around several times to check that everything looks good from both sides. Especially when working with fluffy socks, your thread might get stuck on the other side without you even realizing it. Close the thread by creating a loop like this and then pulling the needle through to make a knot. Now repeat with the other side, but this time make sure that you don't sew across this gap between the legs. Once you're done, it should look something like this. Cut out the entire body, taking care not to get too close to the stitches. Then use the gap you left earlier to turn everything the right way around. Grab a handful of stuffing about the size of a small apple and push this into one of the legs. Then repeat with the other 3 and make sure that each limb is firmly stuffed before moving on to the body. I say this in every video, but these plushies always use up more stuffing than you might imagine. The sock fabric is very forgiving, so you can sculpt your piece around quite a bit to make sure everything looks symmetrical. Now close up the gap using a ladder stitch. This method involves alternating stitches on either side, which seals up the opening perfectly. Next, take the other sock and cut off the front just past the heel area. Take a good handful of stuffing and push it inside to make the head. Then take a smaller ball of stuffing and use this to create a slightly elongated nose shape. It's a bit hard to see on camera, but you can use the seam of the sock to help you position the nose. Once you're happy with the head shape, cut off any excess fabric and close the opening using a running stitch. This is a very simple stitch that pulls everything tight like a drawstring. Hold it in place and then make a few more circles of stitches to close it up completely. You can use the same thread to attach the head onto the body. Just alternate one stitch on each side and work in a circular shape. I love this part of making sock plushies because you have a lot of control over the body language. For instance, I wasn't that happy with the shape here because I felt the head was hanging forward too much. I'd prefer to have my unicorn looking up like this. So all you have to do is hold the head in the right position and add another small row of stitches along the back of the neck to fix it into place. Now the basic body is ready, and many people might remember this from my Instagram. I posted a story asking you guys to guess what it would be. If you're not following me yet, then be sure to check out my account at Macaroon, where you can see exclusive previews of upcoming DIYs before anyone else. Next, take the remaining part of the sock and draw 2 wide leaf shapes like this. Backstitch along the lines and cut them out. The bottom part is closed, which is a good thing because this reduces the amount of fluff that falls out of the fabric. Just cut a tiny hole in here and use it to turn the ear inside out. Pinch each one slightly in half near the base so you have something like this, and then use a few stitches to hold it into place. Attach the ears to your unicorn and your plushie is almost ready. Now I'm going to use some beads to make eyes. I find the easiest way to attach round beads is to tie the thread firmly around one of them like this. Then choose the best position and insert the needle slightly further apart than where you want the final eyes to sit. Because the plush is so stretchy, the eyes will get pulled together a tiny bit in the finished version. It's best to attach both beads using the same thread like this. You want there to be a slight tension in the thread so that when you pull it tight, both eyes are symmetrical and facing the right direction. Be sure to pass the needle back and forth at least several times to make sure everything is firmly attached. Then tie a knot and exit the thread from behind the ear. If you find beads a bit too fiddly, then you can always use buttons instead, which are larger and don't need to be sewn on using the same thread. To make the unicorn horn, we're going to use needle felt. This is a great DIY for using up scrap wool that you might have lying around from older projects. The white color is for the hair, so I'm going to set that aside for now. For best results when making the horn, choose a lighter and darker shade of the same color, like the blue that I'm using here. Start by rolling the lighter color into a cone shape and poke it to compress the wool. A common beginner's mistake is to stop felting when you get a basic shape like this, which is after about 5 minutes of poking. This is still too soft, and you can feel it by bending it or when sticking the needle inside. You can tell there are lots of air gaps between the wool fibers, so you want to keep on working until everything feels a lot firmer. If your piece starts shrinking, then simply wrap more wool around it to build up the shape. Normally, you should poke until the entire surface is completely smooth. However, in the case of making the unicorn horn, I'm going to stop when the topmost layer is still slightly fluffy like this. Now take the darker wool and pull off a tiny strand. Roll it between your fingers to make it even thinner, and then wrap it around the horn in a spiral shape. Use your needle to push it downwards so it creates an indentation in the softer wool. Once the spiral looks good, start sculpting the details until you get a lovely seashell or horn shape like this. Even though this wasn't difficult to make, it did take over 40 minutes of patient poking to create the final piece. So always set aside enough time when felting and spread one project over several days if needed. Now attach your thread to the outer part of the horn and sew it into place using a ladder stitch. Once again, you can play around with the position and simply add more stitches if you want the horn to point in a different angle. And of course, you can always skip the color changing part and simply use normal felting wool, such as the design I made in this video here. If you're making this plushie for babies or very small children, then you should definitely use plain felting wool, since you don't want anyone accidentally swallowing the pigment. Pull out some pieces of wool and start arranging them in a hairstyle on the unicorn. It helps to use the felting needle to hold everything into place while you're adding more. However, this is only temporary, so don't poke too hard. Once you're happy with how it looks, carefully pull everything off the plush. If needed, you can also felt the edges together a bit so they don't fall apart. Now it's finally time for the color changing part. I'm using UV sensitive pigment from solarcolordust.com, which changes color in the sunlight. You can test these out in the packaging, and some colors might be more sensitive than others. In this case, I noticed that the blue one wasn't as reactive as the other two, so I decided to stick with pink and purple. Pour a tiny bit of pigment into a container and spread out any lumps. Next, take a hairspray, and I went for the super strength version. Carefully spray the wool and then use a paintbrush or makeup brush to dust on the pigment. This dries fairly quickly, so you can test it out right away by holding it out in the sun. If needed, you can always repeat the process to build up more color. Just take care not to add too much hairspray, otherwise you can glue the felting wool together and it won't look nice and fluffy anymore. Now you can reattach the hair to the unicorn and feel free to poke harder with the needle this time. However, you will need to use some thread as well to attach everything properly. I'm making some small stitches down the neck and using a ladder stitch for the tail. As a finishing touch, I'm going to use some blusher to make cheeks. And now your unicorn sock plushie is done. If you hold this outside or near a window, then the hair turns from white to pink, which is great fun to watch. The UV intensity makes a difference, so on a very sunny day you'll get much darker colors than on a slightly cloudy day. This DIY is surprisingly straightforward to make, however it does consist of several different stages. My advice is not to try making everything in one go and spread the project out over 2 or 3 days. This way you can focus completely on sewing, then needle felting, and then assembling everything together. I hope you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to check out all of my other plushie tutorials which I've linked below. I'm Joanna, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye!